There we go. Welcome to the Human First AI Marketing Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Montague. My guest this week is Dustin Riechmann, and he is at Seven Figure Leap, sevenfigureleap.com with the number 7, just like I have the number 9 in my domains. It helps you get a nice short domain name, right, Dustin?
It does. I mean, you have to buy both, the spelled out version and the numerical version so people know how to find you. But yeah, I'm a big fan of the numerical.
Oh, that's good. Well, you've made the 7-figure leap. You can afford to the domain.
By all the domains.
All right. Well, I like to start with the human part first. It's called Human First AI. So you're Story Brand certified, which I think is awesome. And you help people at 7-Figure Leap tell their stories on podcasts with podcast guesting and getting out there and finding new people. And I think that's a really cool gig. And I think a lot of people need help with it. How did you get into it?
Yeah, through humans. There's this book called Building a Story Brand, New York Times bestseller. This guy named Donald Miller wrote it. And I was aware of it. Like, I think I've had the ebook version, I was like Story Brand aware, but I was running my program. This is going back about over a year ago, almost 2 years ago, actually, at this point. And someone on my program was like, "Oh, you need to meet my friend Macy." I'm like, "Okay, that sounds cool." So I had this introduction call with Macy, and we're talking about all the cool stuff she does. And she helps authors, and she does book launches, and she kind of throws in, I'm also the certification director at Story Brand. And I was like, "Oh, I've heard of that." And so basically what happened was she ended up joining my program, and I started working with her. And the more I got to know her and know more about this community and this what they were doing at Story Brand, I'm like, I think I need some of that in my life. So like a lot of things that have evolved in my business, it really started with this human to human connection and this person, and she sort of personified for me the power of what Story Brand was about. So then I got myself on a plane, went down to Nashville, did sort of an intensive certification, and learned how to use this with my own clients. So but yeah, that's how I got plugged into the Story Brand community.
Awesome. And I guess there is a whole bunch to unpack here. So you also built your own AI for your clients. So that's one of the reasons we're talking here today is you have Dustin AI for your clients that can answer and speak in your voice. What made you decide on that project?
Yeah. So, to give people a little context, so for about 2.5 years, we've been working with people in small groups, mastermind groups, and we really help them use the power of their story and podcast guesting as really like an evangelization tool. So a lot of people would come to me and they'd say, I'm really good at what I do. I'm like an expert at what I do, but I'm not very good at marketing. And I was like, well, what if your marketing was just teaching and sharing your story and telling what you do? And like, that sounds really good. And I'm like, well, podcast guesting has done that for me in a couple of different businesses. And so in doing that, we've eventually created a whole community. So now both the active students in a cohort and the alumni and the mastermind members who are sort of the more advanced arm of what we do all exist within a single community. It's hosted on Circle. And so that's been new this year. And we got about 6 months into that experience. And I just kind of had this epiphany of, using AI for myself and realizing that the tactics, the content, the things that we teach, have value, but ultimately they're going to be ubiquitous and people are going to be able to just be like, what would Dustin have me do in a public sense? And I thought, well, what if we had this as a tool private to our community where I get, asked a lot of the same questions. And what I realized when I started looking through what we've created over the course of 2.5 years is literally thousands of hours of live coaching and Q&A sessions and live teaching and keynote addresses and all this stuff. And I'm like, well, what if there was a 24/7 version of what would Dustin do and how would Dustin coach me through this? And so, yeah, I worked with someone named Dan Cumberland, and he's an alumni of the program. So he really understood me and kind of the character of what we're about. And I said, I don't want just like an avatar of me, like ChatGPT avatar. I want this to be more holistic, more of a coaching experience. And I want it to be private in the community. So that was sort of the vision is, could we just have a really cool tool that people could access? It wasn't as much about taking workload away from me, but in a sense, a 24/7 on-demand version of what we teach and trained with all this kind of weird niche stuff that I focus on. And so, yeah, we created that. It's actually created in Claude, and it's proprietary. And so the experience of it is you ask it something like, can you write me a podcast pitch? And it will guide you in the same way I would of discovery and like, yeah, absolutely. And let's ask you some questions, and it'll give you that answer, right? In this case, it would give you a really rich podcast pitch. And what I think is really cool about it is it will give you some coaching around that, and here's why Dustin would say this, and here's some ways that you can use this. So it's a more expansive answer than just give me the thing. And the other thing that it is set up to do is have some guardrails. So if you say, Dustin, where should I eat dinner, or what outfit should I wear? It'll basically say Dustin's not an expert at that. Like, here's some things you could ask Dustin. And so, that's really, like, why we created it and how it's been used. So it's been active fully for about 3 months, and it's been really fun because part of what we've encouraged community members and clients to do is to, if you really like something you got out of it, like, shoot a quick loom and put it in here in this thread so people can see case studies and examples of what you can do with it. And people have done some stuff that I hadn't originally envisioned. And that's been the more fun part, is how are the humans plugging into this, and what are the creative ways that they're using it that actually go beyond the initial prompts that I thought people would be using.
I think that's awesome. We're going to get into a really good discussion here, I can tell, because I know from my podcasting experience, and you were nice enough to have me on your Pod Profits Summit that is either coming up or already passed, depending on when you watch this video. But I think the outgoing side of this and the creation side is awesome. But I love this first lesson that they're so cheap and affordable and easy to do now that you can actually turn your marketing efforts internally to your clients, or a channel sales partner, or your own group of memberships and things that you have if you're an association or a trade group or anything. You got 100 employees, you can create an internal AI for that. So I'm picturing in my head a whole bunch of questions people would have if they didn't even know that was a possibility. Like, how long would you say, I mean, you already had a lot of the data and stuff in the background, but how long did it take to set up? How much did it cost you? And it sounds like you would recommend it to other people so far, but if somebody was thinking about doing it, do you have any advice for them?
So, I mean, in my case, I was sort of the case study, for Dan, who's developing these tools for coaches. And so it was a bit of a discovery process. It was like, first of all, how do we get it to function? Do we want it to function? So which platform should we use? What data does it need? And so we went through that process. And then a whole different challenge is, how do we let people interface with it? So I didn't want them to have to do is like go on some separate login and log into ChatGPT or somewhere. Yeah. It's like, how can we make this native within Circle so that you're literally in the same place you're already in and you can interact with it right there? And we accomplished that. So I paid $5,000 for this experiment, this consultation. I think it's paid off as a big value because it's a rich bonus for people that come in. People do crave AI, and a lot of, at least my clients, don't fully understand it, right? And so to be able to say, you don't need to understand it, it's just here. And anything that you'd be inclined to ask Dustin, like, go here first. That's been important. And then the other thing that's been important on an implementation standpoint, if people are thinking, how could I use this, is integrating it into the flow of what we do. So instead of, say, we're talking about pitching, just to keep that example, we have a whole week in our program that's about that, and I have teaching about that. But instead of saying, let's start from scratch, it's like, hey, let's share my screen, let's fire up Dustin AI and let's use that. And so making it more of a native part of how people think about implementation, I think has been real. That's been the training for me as like the facilitator and the coach, is getting out of my default of starting from scratch and thinking, no, we already have a tool that's going to be the shortcut, and let's show people and demonstrate how to use it. I'd say, like, I don't know. That's been my experience. It took us about.
You said something else interesting about protecting your own IP there that I wanted to highlight for people, because I, worked with a brand that didn't really understand that all of their IP was already out in ChatGPT, and I have I've seen a lot of people scared to kind of do these things or these tools and say, well, if they have Dustin AI, they don't need me. Or I think the bigger issue is, like, if you don't do this, what happens? I think if you play this out, the AI, like, they're going to take their questions, or they're going to start building their tools, or one of your clients is going to dump your program materials into ChatGPT and ask it to try and build it a custom pitch generator because they need to solve this problem anyway. And so this is gonna happen if you're, saying, yeah. And I saw a lot of companies do this when I was building social media accounts and stuff. And they go, well, what if our customers say something bad online about us? And you go, well, they're going to do that.
Yeah, right.
So the question is, do you want to be there when they say something bad and know about it? Or do you want it to be out in the public and you have no idea because you're not on social media? And I kind of feel like this is happening again, where the people that use AI, that leverage it, that build their connection, and your customers know that there's Dustin AI, means they don't have to go look for another tool. And the more they use it, the more valuable it makes you, not the less valuable it makes you.
And you bring up a good point, because actually, I've been playing around with it, as I said, but there was a moment about probably 6 months ago, about 4 months before I decided to actually do this as a project, maybe 8 months ago, where one of the members was starting to post. They're like, hey, I uploaded your training video and then I've been using my chat GPT and look what the pitch it created. I'm like, okay, like both interesting and a little scary, because like my IP's out there. And this was really before the more current version where ChatGPT actually goes out on the internet, right? So, like literally yesterday, I'm like, someone had posted their top thoughts of the year, from their podcast. I was like, oh, so I put, Dustin 7-Figure Leap podcast. What are the top insights from the episodes this year? And it put like an amazing summary. I'm like, oh, geez, like I'm doing this, but as the guy who owns it, but like anyone could do this, right?
Yeah.
So that was also kind of a telling thing is, your IP, if you have any sort of public facing brand, or you do any kind of teaching, I do public presentations, teach online, post on LinkedIn, have a podcast, guest on podcast. Therefore, everything Dustin has taught publicly is basically already there for the taking. And so
you're not keeping any secrets.
Yeah. So pulling it inside, I think what that does, I don't know if it'll ultimately protect it, but what I think it does is it makes people think first of, this is the source. This is like, I have the guy here who I'm querying. Like this is probably more true than something I could go do on my own. And my community and my program is not an AI tool. The AI tool is a supplement and, a bonus to that. So a lot of the value we create is actually through peer-to-peer insights, through giving people more clarity, giving people context, and really a big value that we drive is connection, right? So you get into this mastermind group and now you're in a communal environment. You've got a place to celebrate wins, a place to talk about frustrations. Yes, there are outputs like a podcast pitch that frankly anyone can just go use my name and probably get my template and do it. But doing that within the context of a community and humans to like say, yes, that's a good pitch, but does that serve your business goals? Is that a good representation? Is this the foot you want to put forward? Those types of questions, you don't get the qualitative questions. You get the quantitative output, but you don't get the qualitative questions without the context. And so I think bringing it internal where you're going to get the context, if you're using it within what we do. And the other thing that's cool for me is I can look at the back end and I can see what queries people are asking, and it's getting smarter as they ask them, right? And so we're doing our best to kind of keep it as an internal tool rather than a replacement for the IP that maybe does become inevitable. So
yeah, well, I think you hit on another interesting thing that I found here at Avenue 9, which is the human first part is important, but also the human last part is important.
Yes.
So, one, they get to interact with you and learn from you before they use the AI tool to pitch, but then also in your community, they get humans to review it after you create the pitch. So then you can use our 25 years of sales and marketing expertise to review it and go, you know what, that's not bad, but if you tweak this and this, it would make a lot more sense. Or this analogy got weird, maybe that's not what you meant there. And I found AI kind of does this a little bit, but humans do it a lot, which is whenever they start talking about themselves, they go into resume speak and they dehumanize themselves. And so they're like, I need this pitch to be so polished and so perfect that it doesn't sound real anymore. And so sometimes you have to muddy it back up and you have to rehumanize it.
And part of what a big part of what makes a pitch effective, we do a lot more than just pitching, but to kind of run with this example is empathy, right? And so I could tell AI to go look at this podcast that I want to be on, and try to create some sort of relational anchor, which is how we like to start our pitches, and say like, hey, Mike, give some relevant fact that both lets you know I am a human, and has some sort of empathy and some sort of, I don't know, stroke your ego a little bit, right? Like, warm you up in a sense, right? Like that, those are nuanced. And the way I want to connect with you is really hard for AI to replicate, because there's so many ways I could connect with you. And there's these quantitative ways of like, oh, you have 200 shared LinkedIn connections. So AI may say, hey, Mike, we have 200 shared LinkedIn connections, right?
Right.
And that is a relational anchor, but that would make you close the email because you're like, what weirdo counts up the number of, instead, if I'm like, hey, I noticed you're from this town, and, my grandma grew up there, and I don't know if you've ever been to this park that she talked about growing up in as a kid or something, like these story-based, empathy-based connection, I don't think is going to be replicated by AI. And so even when it spits out a beautiful pitch, we're, like you just said, we go back and we say, now, how can we make this less polished or more, more human, I guess is the word I'm going for, so.
Yeah. And I think, human friendly and audience friendly is a term I use a lot, because just because we can automate something on our end doesn't mean we should, if for the person who's reading it or listening to it or watching it. Is like, how does that benefit them if you create this AI podcast that you didn't have to spend any time on? Is it still delivering value or interesting to the audience and stuff?
Cause the extension, and you and I talked a little bit about this as we recorded for my summit, is right now, the AI can go do an avatar of Mike, and AI could go do an avatar of Dustin, and it could record what we're doing right now without us, right? And it would be very factual, and it would be very concise and tight, and you would learn the facts and figures that you need to learn. What it won't have is nuance, emotion, stories, the human connection that only you and I can really have by being in proximity to each other, even if it is virtually. Like, we're still making eye contact, and you're like, you're leaning into something I say, and I can notice that and be like, oh, we should talk more about that, right? Or you leaned away, and I'm like, maybe this is not something that he feels is serving him or his audience, or he doesn't really want me to go there. Those are maybe someday that'll be replaced too. But I think for now that is where a lot of the value in interview-based podcasting is that it's still a human interaction. And I think people are pretty fascinated by that. Like, we still like to people watch, even if we could have an AI description of everyone's history that's walking by us. It's like, I want to see how they hold hands. I want to see how they smile. I want to watch people argue. I want to see the dog poop on the sidewalk and have someone walk around it. Like, that realness is still a value, and I think it could get even more valuable as we become more and more virtualized in the information processing that we do. So
I'll skip the dog poop, but I know what you're saying. You gotta experience the sights and smells. Maybe you walk by a fresh bakery.
There you go. That's a more pleasant example.
All right. Now, I wanted to talk to you about podcasting in general, because I found this to be a not so secret weapon for people, but a lot of brands still aren't doing it, and a lot of people aren't using guesting as a strategy. You don't even have to have your own show.
Right.
You can show up on somebody else's show once a week, and you're creating the same amount of content as doing your own weekly show. But in today's world with AI, it all changed 2 years ago, where it was a lot of work. I was paying people hundreds of dollars to do post-production and to write descriptions and everything. And it was really hard for me to aggregate all these episodes or say really what it was worth. When I had 52 episodes at the end of the year, what does that mean? And they were kind of just ephemeral. I would make them and then they would go in the past. But now we can use AI databases to collect all 52, and like you said, do the top takeaways for the year.
There's our conversation that probably prompted me to do that. I'm like, I wonder if I just put in 7 Figure Leap podcast top insights of 2024, and it was like, boom, and it put it out, and I was like, that's really good. And I'm like, well, what if I want to put this on LinkedIn? So I'm like, well, what if Dan Coe wrote this, who's a big LinkedIn influencer? Like, write it like Dan Coe would write one of his top posts, and then immediately pithy, like formatted well. And I actually posted it on LinkedIn. I changed some stuff. I added an introduction and gave it some context, but I was like, okay, like that was pretty eye opening. So
Yeah, amazing. And I don't think people realize now that if you record a 30-minute conversation like this, it can become a blog post or four. It can become your email newsletter. It can become your social media posts for the week or the month. You can create video shorts. You've got YouTube stuff. It is absolutely like filling an entire marketing calendar from 30 minutes worth of effort,
yep.
and then using AI tools to repurpose that. But in this strategy, you still have to do the work with Seven Figure Leap and Story Brand, and like figuring out how to say it so that what you record is good. You also still have to do the marketing, work that I do at Avenue 9, and say, like, what are we making and how are we tying these together? Is there a call to action? Are we leading anybody to anything? Are we
Yep.
just throwing content out into the universe? And I think you do still have to do, like you said, that review, tweak it, and you got to figure out when to do certain things in what order, and take out the word delve. I always joke.
Yes.
And just make it sound like you a little bit. But you can also then use all of this, like you telling your story, and put that into a custom GPT and start building your own Dustin AI. You can have a Mike AI that's, here's all the podcast guests, here's all the questions I've ever been asked, here's all the thoughtful takeaways I've shared from even in internal meetings, Zoom meetings, and client calls and stuff, and just start aggregating all of that so that you're building this database of stuff that you can now refer back to, where we used to honestly just forget.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many times I taught sales for 15 years, and every 5 years I go, I wonder why I stopped doing that. That was great. I remember that lesson I used to teach, or that exercise that really worked. Let
Yep.
me go back and do that. But now it can all be archived and shared and remembered. So talk a little bit about what you see as the power of podcast guesting and hosting, and why you've kind of made this your mission and your cornerstone for your business.
Yeah, I mean, to give a little context, like how to get into this. So, I was running. I was a partner and doing sales and marketing for a physical product called Fire Creek Snacks. So, literally a meat stick, and we had to do a lot of sampling, as you might imagine. It's like, why is this meat stick better than Slim Jim or Chomps or whatever? And so we did a lot of physical in-person appearances, and then COVID happened. That was all shut down, and so I was like, how am I going to market without leaving my house for something that's so sampling oriented, right? This is different than coaching or something. And so I got on my first podcast, and it was extremely powerful. So I'm selling meat sticks to strangers on the internet, and I was actually on a business show doing it. So like, doesn't really fit like as far as like a strategy, but it worked because people were really into the story. And like, so what that taught me immediately, the first story that we told was how we took a local product and we brought it online. And that was very timely at the time of COVID, right? And then as that evolved, there were other stories, and they're all true stories. They're just different stories for different contexts, which again, I just don't think AI can replicate. And so one of the stories is like my co-founder in that company, he's a third generation butcher shop owner, family meat man, sort of like this nostalgic thing. And I was telling his story in a sense, and then there was a revelation that we had actually grown up in the same hometown, like a 7,000 person town in the middle of Illinois, a farm town, and that we never met each other because I moved away. I was a couple years older than him. I moved away before we got to high school. But what was really cool is like one day, and this is a true story that I realized after I started podcasting and I started to tell this story and it really resonated with people. We realized at some point that my grandfather, who was in the American Legion, color guard, served in World War II, and his grandfather were both in the same American Legion on the same color guard and did like funerals and things together. And he used to talk about, oh, Bill Hansen, and my grandpa did. And he's like, oh, Bernie. And one day it was like, because they're both passed away. One day it's like, wait, your grandpa's him and my grandpa's him. And like we had both heard about each other's grandpas, and here we are with a company, on the internet doing this crazy stuff. And so I tell a more elaborate version of that story, and people would buy and they would tell us, the meat stick's awesome. I just loved your story, and like, how cool is it that your grandpa served in World War II together? And again, like facts and figures are good, but like these stories are what people remember because it makes them feel an emotion. In this case, like nostalgia and like family and things like that. So anyway, that's how I got into this whole world. I started to realize the power of storytelling, grew that brand to 7 figures. And then when people started noticing that, and they're like, wow, this is different. Like this is a different kind of marketing. how can you help me with this? That's when this whole 7-figure leap thing started as a coaching endeavor. And then of course I've used podcast guesting to teach and to, share the power of storytelling in a deeper way. So anyway, I think the original question was like, why podcast guesting? So that's how I got into it.
Yeah.
And I started off thinking and teaching the mechanics, which we still do. Like, how do you find the right show? Like, what's your message? How do you find the right show? How do you pitch the show? How do you do a good interview? And that's about a third of what we teach in our main program. But about 2/3 is like, okay, what do you do with it? Right? Like to drive results for your business. And most of that is relationships. And so it is like, how do I develop a relationship with the host and make sure they respect me, I respect them, they become a referral partner and build a flywheel around that? How do I develop a relationship with the other guest experts that are on this show, right? How do I, of course, repurpose the content as you were getting at? Like, how do I use this as my marketing and then go grow my LinkedIn, my YouTube, whatever platform of choice that you have, and have the fuel for all these like relationship building and content repurposing and authority building activities be me talking and telling my story, because the people I like to work with have a great story and they're very good teachers. They just don't like want to do the nuts and bolts of day-to-day, the grind of digital marketing as we used to know it with SEO and social media and all that. So I feel like podcasting and podcast guesting are, I don't know, easy, free, fun ways to build relationships and create a ton of marketing material that's true to you and your story if you do it right. And that's really what we focus on, is like, let's make this as easy and as simple and as effective as possible and give people that ultimate shortcut so they're not dabbling around with it and taking 3.5 years like I did to kind of figure it all out. So
yeah, I 100% agree with all that. And I would highlight two things. One is the relationship works both ways. The reason I love podcast hosting is because I'm going to meet 52 people that are doing something similar or tangential to what I do. I'm going to build a relationship with them and get to know them and their story for 30 minutes. And I'm going to get to celebrate them, highlight, post on their behalf, share to my audience, introduce them to cool people, and then hopefully they do the same.
Yep.
The second thing in that, I think, and I'd love to hear your opinion on this, but for me, I think the world of marketing is changing. I think the idea of SEO or, build a website and they come, or you start a Facebook group, or you make a business page on LinkedIn and people will randomly follow it. I don't think anybody needs any more content to follow. No. But what does work is this kind of hand-to-hand combat. If I'm going to go meet somebody, I'm going to build a relationship. They can introduce me to another one, and I can one by one add people to my network who might want to watch my podcast or, follow me and connect on LinkedIn or give me introductions to people. But I think that idea, so many people are focused on like going viral or figuring out the algorithm. And to me, I don't care about any of that. Podcasting is worth it way before any particular show gets 1,000 or more downloads. You agree with that? Any thoughts you'd add to that?
Yeah, I mean, 1,000%. My whole business model is sort of quality over quantity, right? So I have a very powerful and effective email list, but it's pretty small, and we built a 7-figure business, in 3 years. And so if you go back to sort of a concept of 1,000 true fans or the Dream 100, this idea of like, what if I selected the types of clients or even the individual people that I think I could help the most, and I spent my efforts on that. And podcasting is a great tool to do that, right? So can I get on their podcast, or can I be on a podcast they've been on and then borrow the credibility of that experience to build a relationship with that individual? I find clients that way, partners, collaborators, and yeah. So I 1,000% agree with that. Like, this whole idea of build it and they come is I think pretty much over for good. And the idea that
I think that takes us to our last question here that I wanted to ask you, which is, where do we go from here? So I think, let's go at least 5 years out, at least 2030. But you can go as far out as you feel like you need to make the point. Where do you think all of this ends up? Do we end up all on the beach because AI is selling AI and interviewing each other in podcasts, or do we circle back to this local communities and hand-to-hand combat or face-to-face conversations, or is there some, other alternative future that you see when you project into your business as far as you can see? What do you think happens?
Yeah, I think for one, I really don't know, and I try not to predict too hard, right?
Nobody
But I
does.
can say what I'm doing proactively in my business is building it around community and around mentorship. So I want to create an environment where you have really cool people that you just love to be around, who energize you, who think abundantly and have similar goals, and you're kind of feel like you're on the same path. And to each other and from me and from other people that I kind of elevate in that community, you have mentorship, which means I've been there, I've done that. I know I already foresee the things you're going to have problems with, and I can help you in advance. I do think like the content is going to be ubiquitous. I think everything is going to be customized as an experience. So if I get on my phone and I'm looking up the best restaurant, it's going to give the best restaurant for me and my preferences. It's already going to know if I have an allergy and the hours I like to eat and all that. Like all that's coming real soon. But the idea of community, I think, is going to get more and more important. I think in-person events are going to get more and more important. We've really dove deep into a virtual experience, in general, but also because of COVID. And we've already seen that, there's a huge uptick in travel. There's a huge uptick in people wanting in-person experiences. And I think it's just a lot of it's just the energetic proximity of being around people is still very valid. And I think it's part of our DNA. And so I don't think that's going away. So I feel like in 5 years or whatever, 10 years out, I feel like it's our experience interacting with the internet and virtually is kind of ubiquitous, if that makes sense. It's kind of like, you don't have to think about it. Like everything I want to know is I just know it. Maybe it's a neural link. I don't know. But like information is like 0% valuable in the sense that it's just
Yeah, I think so
ubiquitous.
too.
And I think there's more of a communal desire, right? Like kind of as a joke, but like this idea of meeting you at a campfire in a cave and like chanting and high-fiving and hugging and going for runs on the beach and swimming together, that kind of stuff. Like people are going to crave that
Depending
more
on
and more.
how things go with our AI overlords, we
Yeah.
could all be back in caves.
We might just be back in caves and by default, but I think we'll also
No,
choose
I hear
that.
you though. I think there is this idea of I think it's going to circle back. We've gotten to the point where you can't chase it. I mean, there are going to be big companies that do, right? Facebook, Google, Amazon. They're going to build the tools that kind of run everything. It looks like, and they can afford to buy up any other tools that are interesting along the way. So I think that's going to be hard to compete with. But locally, they can't have those relationships at that scale for 8 billion people. They can't have these custom relationships and conversations with individuals that we can locally. So I think there is going to be a circle back. At least I hope so. Anyway, so let's leave people on that note and talk about how they can connect with you directly. So sevenfigureleap.com is the website. You can schedule a consultation with Dustin or check out a lot of the cool programs that he's got. The podcast is Seven Figure Leap. Wherever you're listening or watching to this one, be a great spot. And then look for the Pod Profits Summit. You can see me as a guest on there and a whole bunch of other really awesome marketing and podcasting experts. Anything else you can do to help us or we can do to help you?
No, man, I think that's it. Yeah. So sevenfigureleap.com is our home base. Whatever we're up to, it's on there. There's a lot of free resources and ways to connect. I'm just, I've found that my, I don't know, calling, whatever you want to call it, purpose, unique ability is connecting people. And so that means I also love to connect with people. So if anyone's just like digs the story, wants to know a little bit more about like how I built this business, or like, obviously if they want direct podcasting help, that's like what our main program does. But I just like to connect with cool people. So I think those are the channels. LinkedIn's the other big place that I like to hang out and share stories. Maybe as a quick closing thought, I mentioned that like, hey, top podcast insights, that post was fine. Right. And then today I posted like, hey, I hit this business goal and, I went through that, but the thing that got everyone's attention is I said, and I achieved it in a way that I didn't expect. And that what I've learned this year a lot is like, hold tightly to the goal, but hold loosely to the tactics or the process. Right. And I gave a very clear example. So in other words, I gave my story and something that ChatGPT can't know, like how did I feel about this? What were my expectations versus what actually happened? And 10 times the engagement. So I hope that that's like an indication that people still do care about the human experience and about people's emotions and intuition and and I don't know, like I actually coming into this call, I'm
Absolutely,
like,
they do,
I'm
and
glad that
they
did better. So
always have. I had one question. Have you had your wife or kids ask Dustin AI instead of you yet?
no,
Have
because
they-
it's trained to only give kind of marketing advice. So I'd be scared of what it would tell them if they asked for anything that they would hopefully ask me in our household. But yeah, to your point, to that kind of final point, I hope that as AI sort of takes us to an extreme of virtual connection and information, and we don't really need to like expend energy on that. I hope that sort of as a culture and a society and a human race that we get back to like the family connection, the friends connection, and that in-person human connection becomes like something we crave even more because our brains are freed up to care about the stuff that really matters. And if like at least for me and my value system, that's it. So
I appreciate it, Dustin. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. And I agree with you. I think we've known as marketers for a long time, right? That human connection and the human side of the story is always more interesting. It's funny. My best post of the year was me growing the beard for No Shave November. More likes than anything I created on sales or marketing or other things this year. So it is what it is. But that means people still want to connect with people and not with brands and posts and AI robots, and that's good news for us. So thanks for listening, everybody, till the bitter end. Good luck. Keep going. Have some fun. Later. Bye.